All right, guys, it's time for the Next Level Guy Show, a men's interview, interest, and improvement-focused podcast featuring interviews with the greats from all industries to help you better your life. Each week, a new episode features an interview with one of the greats, covering all aspects of their story, from life hacks to tips and protocols that have allowed them to live life on the next level. We then highlight concrete action steps that you can use to improve your life. And now, your host, Ian Dawson McKay.
And today's guest is Stephan Kesting. Stephan is an adventurer, firefighter, and lifelong martial artist who thrives in high-pressure situations. Whether he's navigating the remote Arctic, making split-second decisions as a firefighter, or battling on the mats as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, he's spent his life mastering the art of resilience. For over 40 years, he's crisscrossed the Canadian North, leading wilderness expeditions and completing solo journeys into the Arctic's most unforgiving landscapes. With an honours BSc in biology from McGill University and an MSc in Arctic Botany, specialising in climate change from the University of British Columbia, his deep connection to the natural world is both academic and personal. His 7 years as a field biologist further sharpened his understanding of survival, adaptation and perseverance. A martial artist since the age of 12, Stephan has been a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for nearly 2 decades, helping tens of thousands of practitioners worldwide through his books, courses and YouTube channel. In the fire service, he serves as a captain, and in 2001 he was awarded the National Medal of Bravery for saving 2 trapped firefighters from a burning warehouse. His latest book, Perseverance, Life and Death in the Subarctic, chronicles his grueling 1,000-mile solo journey through the Canadian wilderness following a life-threatening illness. Facing storms, bears and his own self-doubt, he rediscovered the strength to endure in the raw solitude of the North. Part survival epic, part personal transformation guide, Perseverance is a gripping and deeply human story of how to push past limits, embrace uncertainty, and finding the will to keep going. And now, let's get to the interview. Normally I say welcome to the show. I'm now saying welcome back for what we discussed was the 3rd time. For those few people under a rock who maybe don't recognise the legend that is Mr. Kesting, how would you describe yourself? Because you've got quite an interesting backstory.
Well, that's always a tricky one, because what is your identity formed around? I guess if you go to the employment, I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. I run grapplearts.com. I am a firefighter, a full-time firefighter, and I also really enjoy adventuring and the outdoors. So I guess the reason we're talking this time is because of something I did in the outdoors a few years ago and then wrote a book about. But it's these different identities that you're trying to juggle that are in some ways complementary and in some ways interfere with each other. Obviously, if you're out in the bush in a canoe, you can't be training jiu-jitsu at the same time. But doing jiu-jitsu and interacting with people actually teaches you how to do things in the outdoors, because it teaches you how to stay calm under pressure and calm in difficult situations. And that is something that's transferable across all these different areas, regardless of whether it's firefighting, regardless of whether you're trying to run whitewater or figure out how to deal with a bear that's coming into your camp, or trying to weasel your way out of an armbar that your training partner's caught you in. Being calm and continuing to think is probably the single biggest transferable thing between all those different bifurcated or trifurcated parts of my personality.
Because there is some amazing depth within you. Because when I knew quite a chunk of your story before I started reading the book. And as I started getting into the phenomenal book you've written called Perseverance, it really kind of blew me away by just how much you go into your story and how honest and frank you are about it. And by the end, I was thinking, this guy does define perseverance. We'll go over the boring questions first. Why did you pick perseverance? What did it mean to you before this epic trip? What you kind of understood about it before you went on this amazing adventure?
If we're talking about the term perseverance, I guess it's very similar to endurance, and it means not giving up. And there are so many times in life that the only way through something is the only way to get out of something is to go through it and to keep going. Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. And sometimes that's the way. It doesn't mean you need to pick every single battle. It doesn't mean that sometimes you can't opt out of difficult situations. But sometimes these things are thrust upon us. In the case of the adventure that I did in the book, the genesis of that, sort of a twofold genesis. One was thinking about it for 20 to 30 years, right? That's when I first became aware of the canoe routes in this area, these ancient routes that people had traveled for thousands of years and that were not very much followed today. But then the real kick in the ass was dying of kidney failure and using that to basically put a boot in my butt to get me to go. And the only way through that kidney failure process was to continue and do the process and to try and be as healthy as I could, and then go through the transplant surgery, which I got a kidney from my brother. I'm incredibly grateful for that. Thank you, Christoph. And then trying to recover from that. And that's a long process. And you know what you need to do. It's just like being caught on the bottom of a mountain. You know what the steps are. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. But you do know what you have to do. So similarly, recovering from surgery, you know what you need to do. You need to go to your doctors. You need to go and do the blood work. You need to try and get up and get moving. In my case, every surgery I've ever had, the sort of central treatment for it has been walking, right? Just trying to get up and move as soon as you can. It's kind of interesting how the thinking on that has changed over the last 50 years. You used to have a surgery or a hip replacement and you'd be in bed for 6 weeks, and now they want you up and walking the same day.
Yep.
So sometimes the only way out of something is through it. And so the ability to not stop, whether you're too dumb or too stubborn to stop, is an open question sometimes. But the ability to not stop and to keep going is a very powerful one.
Do you think that was the sort of what gave you that power? Because, I was so keen to have you on because you've persevered in building the business. You persevered in getting your black belt, but you always had that kind of goal at the end of it, that win. Do you think that was kind of what motivated you through that dark time? Because it would have collapsed to a lot of people. But were you sort of doing it because you could see that goal, that you could push yourself on, that you knew that it was basically to survive at that point? How did you kind of bring yourself out of that funk to push yourself on?
Yeah. Well, it's always easy in retrospect to say, I always knew, I just needed to keep going. Whereas the truth is that reality is a lot messier than that. There are days when you're like, oh God, like this is never going to work. I'm never going to get better. I'm always going to be this screwed up physically and mentally. So it's easy in retrospect to paint a single coherent vision. That's not what it looks like at the time. I think some of it was intellectually knowing that having a goal, a difficult goal, would motivate me to keep going. It's kind of like people who want to lose weight. They sign up for a 10K race 6 months from now. And they know that by signing up for something and paying, I don't know, the $200 registration fee or whatever it is to go and run the race, they know that'll keep them doing the training. So they're kind of they're creating their own carrot at the end of a rope that they're running towards. Some people, they go and hire a personal trainer, right? If I'm paying this dude $100 an hour, then I better go and work out because I'm going to pay him regardless of whether I go. And, on a micro scale, say on that journey, I would use micro incentives, which is like, if I make it to that point over there, it's going to take me about half an hour of paddling into the wind. I get to stop and I get to have, I don't know, a couple squares of chocolate. I get to stop and I get to have a drink of water. I get to stop and I get to put on my earbuds and listen to, half an hour of music, even though my charge on my phone is getting low and it's kind of overcast and I can't recharge it. It's using these sets of goals and incentives to keep you going. So thinking about getting up north and doing this trip, or rather exploring this area that I'd wanted to explore since my 20s, and I was now in my 50s, that was kind of an incentive to, it's kind of the light at the end of the tunnel. If I can continue with my various therapies, if I can keep on building my strength and building my endurance, if I can keep on even building my business so that it can survive without me while I'm gone up there, then I get to do this. So it was kind of chosen. And it was also a thing that I wanted to check off my life list, right? There's nothing like having a near-death experience to remind you that you're going to die, right? Memento mori. Remember, you're going to die. And using that to focus what you really want to get done and what you really want to do. So it's a useful thought exercise. I'm definitely not a life coach. I'm definitely not a psychologist. I'm definitely not a philosopher, but it's a useful exercise anyway to say, if I knew I only had a couple of years left, what would I really want to do? And what would I really want to experience in that time? And then try and find a way to experience it. Even though you may live longer than 2 years, right? And if that's really that important to you, that you'd spend a couple of weeks or a couple of months of your last days on this earth doing that, then why aren't you planning and trying to figure out how to do that now?
Makes a lot of sense, because a lot of people, they get to their 60s, 80s, 90s, and they suddenly sit and go, oh, I wish I'd done this. And I think that's the biggest pain in life, is regret. It's not, we always think it's going to be loss of a partner or whatever. Sometimes it can be just seeing your potential, untapped potential. When you got a kidney from your awesome brother, like he saved your life, like you mentioned. When you're in that dire need, I mean, I was helping my family, dig some crofts and put some like new walkways over some things, and all this kind of stuff. And it suddenly dawned on me, it's like I was knackered doing it, and I remember thinking that I was doing it because I knew I was helping my family. Do you think, in a way, you were doing the trip as much for your brother after his generosity? Was that it? Kind of the perseverance motivated you as much to go on the trip finally, because you were doing it as part for your brother, and this additional awakening, this additional chance of life? What did it teach you about, gratitude, unconditional love, taking their chances while we've got them, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is yes and no. When I was young, I had 4 brothers and a half sister. Then I lost in fairly quick succession 2 of those brothers. And these, they died both when they were 21, that age when young men think that they're going to live forever and that nothing can ever happen and that they can take every stupid risk that comes along. And so in my mind, somehow, this idea of young men dying before their time, that needed to be remembered. And that needed to be memorialized. And in some way, traveling, you resort to your own imagery. You resort to your primal imagery when you're trying to process these big things. And my primal imagery, and something that's been part of my being since I was very young, is the wilderness. It's the forests, it's the lakes, it's the rivers, and it's the Arctic as well. And in a sense, traveling from one zone to another, traveling from the forest out onto the tundra, that part really hit me, and thinking a lot about my own mortality, but also the mortality of my brothers. I think the loss of 2 of my 4 brothers was inextricably bound with my own mortality, and they didn't make it, but I did, because of another brother. So, I mean, that was on my mind continuously as I was working, and especially right at the crux of the trip, which is the transition from the trees out into the tundra, because it's the sort of the land in between, right? It's the land that, to me anyway, represents the transition from life to death. I'm not sure that resonates with anybody else, but like I said, we all find our own metaphors and we all find our own imagery. And for me, that's the imagery.
I think it helps a lot of people because it gives them an idea of you don't have to be swallowed by this darkness. You can use it to then inspire, help, do things, achieve goals in memory or in support of people, and just how frank you are in the book. It is amazingly beautifully written, and there's so many tidbits throughout it, but it's just the level of honesty, and it's not just I had a divorce, this happened. You actually go into how you stayed strong during that point, how you stayed strong while you were going through the surgery, how you stayed strong when your hand was swollen and you had tendonitis in your shoulder, your rotator cuffs were killing you, and all these sorts of things. And you get a newfound level of respect for you, for how you have achieved so much and just kept going and helping so many people. I like to think of the book as The Matrix, because when I seen the Matrix film, you see it as an action film, but then you can see it as a software versus hardware versus liveware kind of, sort of analogy. Then you can see it as a kind of how we kill viruses in the system there's so many different levels you can potentially see it at. But like your book, I could see it as a great book about wildlife and the trip, a great experience thing, a great book about you explaining how you use your mental strength to achieve your goals. There's so many levels to your book. How do you think it's helped you writing it? Have you looked back now and had a bit more of a come to terms with things? Has it helped you develop your thinking, or are you just thinking, hell, I want to go do another journey?
I think it did help to process the journey and to give it meaning. And by that, I mean this. When you're out there and you're out there, I don't know, battling your way across a lake or trying to find your way down a river when the wind is blowing you sideways and you're trying to run what would otherwise be easy whitewater that's now turned into really difficult whitewater because in addition to the current pulling you downstream, the wind is blowing you left and right. You're not thinking deep thoughts in the moment. You're thinking, I should put my paddle over there. You're thinking, oh, those rocks are coming up awfully quickly and it looks like there's a chute to the right. If I eddy out over behind this rock, then I'll be able to get a better look at it. And if I can't run that chute, then I can go over to shore. It's very procedural. Just as if we were grappling, I'd be thinking, oh, he's going for a wrist grab. I better script that wrist. I can set him up. I think I can set him up by pretending to go left, and then I'm going to go right. I'm not thinking about, isn't jiu-jitsu amazing? This is just a metaphor for life. No, I'm thinking, I want to choke him, and I don't want him to choke me. Similarly, it's very, I call it procedural. Maybe there's a better word for it, but it's, what do I have to do next? Similarly, in the bush, most of the time, it's where do I put my paddle? I better watch those clouds coming in because those could turn into thunderstorms. The wind has shifted. The wind has changed in texture. The wind is now becoming more sporadic. The waves are now breaking a little bit more. The shoreline has changed. And your mind just goes in this loop, kind of trying to cover all of the important things that keep you alive. So you're not, you're doing it for more than the reason of just doing it, because you're drawn to this, or I was drawn to this, and it was like a moth to a flame, or iron filings to a magnet. I was being pulled up there, and it was a very dominant image in my brain. And I think at a fundamental level, I understood that it was kind of giving the big middle finger to death, right? Not today. But in terms of using it to, I don't know, process the grief that I felt towards, having lost my brothers, I guess the fear that comes up from nearly dying, and the fear, around, say, potentially leaving your kids without a father, and then not wanting to leave them without a father, not wanting to survive the surgery, but then die on this bloody trip, right? That's another level of, that would be a fine irony, wouldn't it? So I think the process of writing the book, and it was many, many iterations, right? The draft one, there were 14 drafts that I went through in the course of the finished version that you saw. And I can guarantee you that the first couple of versions it was kind of an interesting story. Like, here, first I did this, then I did that. And it took a couple of friends of mine who are brutally honest, going, hey, it's kind of an interesting story, but you know what? You haven't actually said why you did this crazy trip. I'm like, oh, I guess that's true. All right, second draft. and so it's, anything that's good is always a series of iterations, and it depends on you getting honest feedback from people. I'm going to go back to the jiu-jitsu example. You can't get good at jiu-jitsu without honest feedback from people. And that means people shutting down your crappy guard pass attempt and crushing you and demonstrating why you shouldn't have done that. Or in a work setting, somebody giving you honest feedback as opposed to, oh, that's amazing. You just typed something up, or you just asked ChatGPT to write something up and it did. And now this is so useful. Feedback from trusted people with whom you're aligned is incredibly valuable. It's also pretty rare because people don't want to hurt your feelings. Yeah. So you almost have to ask people, okay, your honest opinion here, hurt my feelings if you have to, but tell it to me straight, and then being willing to listen. And that's what ends up producing a good product.
Because, I really did enjoy it. I find it weird at first because I'm not really a reader at it currently, but as I kind of got into it, I started feeling myself, sometimes I'd be away doing something else and stop and think, oh, why am I going to give up on that? And suddenly I would remember a teaching that you'd said, or a mantra. There's all these little gold nuggets of advice about how to approach problems and how to deal with problems. Or I would see and be inspired by something you had written in the book. And it was just sort of, I don't know, it talks to you on different levels that you need at that point in your life. And I think that's why I highly recommend everybody gets a copy of it, because it's not just as full in your story. It's as full in what you've learned and how we can then apply it to our own life. It is beautiful. You deal with a lot of the issues, etc. But you talk in there about your own inspirations. How much did your planning before balance against the life that you actually experienced? Because you talk about these inspirations, like the paddle book. You talk about some of the quotes you've read or your wildlife experience and stuff like that, versus how you actually deal with it while you're there. How much did your prep beforehand reflect what you actually experience? Because how much can we prepare for something like that? If we go out to the shops, it's a trip, but it's not going to kill you. How much did you know, and how do you balance that between what you know, how you can prepare, and holy shit, here's a rapid coming at me?
Well, I'm half German, so preparation is in my DNA there somewhere. And it's funny, if you look at my desk is a mess. There's cables and pens, and I'm not going to show it to you because it'd be embarrassing. And I'm the guy who forgets where his keys are, and I look for my wallet at least once a day. So in some levels, I'm a disaster. But when I go into the bush, that does change. Or when I go to work at the fire hall, that does change. All of a sudden, that part of my mind clicks in, and the organization and planning becomes really important. I'm not saying it's always perfect, but uh, having a plan almost always beats having no plan. And that the difference between success and failure often comes down to planning. And I really enjoy the planning. I mean, I had checklists of checklists, and I had spreadsheets with many, many different tabs covering for that trip, covering everything from logistics, like what are the float plane companies that work in this area, and what are their numbers, and what kind of planes do they have in case I needed an evacuation? What are the medications I'm taking? What are they for? And uh, what is the dosages? What's the food? There's a different tab for food, and what's the calories for each meal? Because I'm trying to hit a caloric total, and roughly what's the weight of that? What are the tides going to be doing when I make it down to Hudson Bay? I'm trying to think of other things. Lists of clothing. I put that into an Excel spreadsheet because I had everything all in one place. Communications equipment. What are my options? What are the different modes of satellite communication I have? Where do I rent it? Where do I buy it? Where do I borrow it? How much does it cost? Which of these should I choose? Repair kit. What should go in my repair kit? There's a separate tab for repair kit. So having these checklists meant that I was fairly well prepared. Of course, it doesn't prepare you for everything because there's a limit. You can only take, just take the example of a repair kit. Ideally, if you had your bag of holding, you would take cinder blocks because maybe you're going to need a cinder block. Maybe you're going to need 10 cinder blocks and bags of mortar. And you should probably take a circular saw and an axe, and a sawzall will be useful, and a whole bunch of hammers because maybe you're going to need to build something. A spare canoe would be useful too. Obviously, that becomes impossible. So now you're trading off size and weight versus completeness, right? Having everything that you might need. And doing these trade-offs, especially in a world or in a scenario, we have very tightly constrained size and weight constraints, is tricky. But I actually enjoy that. And, some people, they like to go on vacation and they like to just be spontaneous. Oh, I'm just going to buy tickets for Europe and I'm going to go to Europe. Okay, cool. And I'm sure that's very, that's fun. And there's some room for that as well. But the advantage of me anyway, planning ahead, when I go to Europe, here are the churches that I want to go visit. Here are the museums I really want to see, whatever. Here are the restaurants I really want to eat at. If I start planning that out 6 months ahead of time, then I have 6 months of enjoyment because I can be thinking about this and I can be in some ways involved, and I'm getting 6 months of pre-enjoyment and then I'm getting the trip. So I really enjoy the process of dehydrating my own food. For example, not only does it taste better than the stuff that you buy, it's probably more healthy, but it allows you to kind of be on that trip for longer. It takes months to prepare, but during those months, I'm still thinking about the trip, and all that pre-planning does allow you to navigate through a reasonably dangerous landscape a little bit more safely.
Yeah, because they will say every plan fails at the first point of contact, but at least I know what you mean. It's like I buy tickets to a festival, for example. I enjoy more thinking about it than actually being there because I'm thinking about who I might see and how it might be and how what I'm going to do with friends. And it's almost like the experience itself isn't as exciting, but you live that experience. And I think that's because there's a bit in the book where you talk about in Africa, that how they have these rituals. We won't get people circumcised as part of the journey. You go into great detail about the different parts of entering manhood from, in these different tribes and different cultures, etc. And I think that really hits home that chapter when you think, we don't have a great war. We don't have a need to go out and save the day. I mean, I was helping my parents do the croft. It made me help them because I knew I was helping them. That was such a bad sense. But, it pushed me on because I knew I was achieving something that they would struggle with. I could do all the heavy lifting, the heavy pushing stuff. But we don't have a need to go outside if you don't want to. You can have your food delivered to your door. You can get your taxi to your work and back. You never need to go outside if you want. How much of that do you think is why men struggle? Why we need the likes of jiu-jitsu, why we need to have these kind of trips. Do you think everybody needs to find a trip like this to kind of discover who we are, what we're capable of, to get out of this comfort zone we're in?
Well, I think we're talking about so many things. Like, that's a very complex question.
I have a problem with these.
I think there are sort of the rituals of coming of age rituals, which used to be very prevalent in many societies, probably all of them, but I'm not an anthropologist and I've not done an inclusive study of this. The truth is that in a pre-industrial world, there were many of the coming of age rituals were difficult, and they involved a chance of injury, whether that was going off to war or whether that was doing a walkabout or getting circumcised as a 16-year-old boy in Africa with no anesthetic, using a piece of broken glass where you're not allowed to display any emotion. And for women, honestly, most in a pre-industrial setting, I'm guessing that pregnancy and having your first kid served as that, because it's difficult, it's painful. In any village, you'd know tons of people who died during childbirth. I'm not saying that should be a woman's coming of age ritual now, but I think historically, probably it served as that kind of that marker in the sand of now
sort of
being
entered womanhood from
or perhaps the onset of menstruation. In some cultures, that was celebrated. And I think we've lost some of that. Now, the good news is there are many ways to recreate that. There's no one way that you have to do it. So it's almost an embarrassment of riches. You could decide to compete at the CrossFit Games. You could go on your gap year and go travel the world. You could join the army. You could go on a canoe trip. There are so many options. Sometimes leads to analysis paralysis. But I think there is value in doing something difficult where there's a chance of a negative outcome, and certainly where success isn't guaranteed. Now, that comes with a huge caveat. I don't think that what I did in the Canadian subarctic is for most people, and I'm not recommending it, because really to do that and to have a reasonable chance of success and to lower your chances of dying requires a fair skill base. You could take somebody who's really, you could take the fittest runner in the world and dump him into a lake, and if he doesn't know how to swim, he's going to drown. It doesn't matter how fit he is. So there's the skill of actually being able to swim, and there's a skill of actually being able to paddle, and there's a skill of actually being able to set up a tent when there's 50-kilometer-an-hour winds ripping across the tundra, and there's the skill of knowing how to bear-proof your food, and there's the skill of how to do an eddy turn above a big rapid, and then how to pack your gear properly. There's a whole lot of knowledge that I've built up over the years. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but at some point, especially in my early 20s, I definitely made it to black belt level in the outdoor field. Was I world-class black belt? Well, that's a different question, but I had a lot of skills. Then in my 30s and 40s, I think those skills actually atrophied because I was in the midst of raising kids and working and buying houses and going through a divorce and buying other houses and that whole circus. And so my skills atrophied, they kind of lay dormant. So in some ways, this trip was a rediscovery of that and allowing those latent skills to come to the surface. And sometimes that was a rough procedure. It didn't always go as smoothly as I wanted because I tried to prepare as much as I could, but ultimately no amount of preparation can actually simulate doing the actual thing. Preparation is good. You'd be screwed without preparation. But then actually getting out there and doing it is always something a little bit different.
So true, because in the book, when shit hits the fan, you can almost, because it's so well written that we can visualize the situation, we can understand where you are or how much you've gone through it to that point and how you work around it. And, like you could argue like complacency is the antagonist demon to perseverance, how you fall back to the level of your training, not to rise to the level of your expectations. And I love how that in the book you discuss having a notepad where you write out all your problems that you come to. So, and it's like you can actually sit with you while you're doing it and go, I can see how he then plans and understands and adapts his thinking and uses your training and how to adapt to that with your experience or your understanding and like how you risk assess in real time. It's how does that help you in your way of thinking by writing out your problems? Do you find that lets you kind of make your internal computer better at thinking through decisions and doing real-time assessments and calculations about what you're going to do for your actions in life?
Well, there are a couple different decision-making processes that go on, right? There's the immediate response. If we're kickboxing and you throw a jab cross combo at my head, I don't have time to write out my problems. I better rely on the training that I have to try and slip the jab and then use footwork to get out of the way of the cross. If I'm paddling a whitewater river and the boat starts flipping one way, I better have that bracing stroke ready to stop the boat from flipping. So there's the in the moment decision or problem solving, which is one level of analysis. And this is ultimately why we train and why we try to get those skills razor sharp, because there's immediate problems that immediately need to be solved. If you're driving down the road and somebody swerves in front of you, you hit the brakes, right? You don't make a list of your problems. But if you have to get a new car, right? Your old car breaks down and you're looking at getting a new car. Now is the time for writing out, what you want. And for me, I really like working on paper and having paper physical checklists and spreadsheets. That helps me with organizing my thoughts. But interestingly, we use it in the fire department as well. You would think that an emergency like building on fire, people on the front lawn with smoke inhalation, and somebody lost, we don't know if they're in the building or not, you'd think that would be the first class of emergency, where you just have to use reflexes. And the answer is yes and no. If you're in command of the situation, if you're the captain or the battalion chief in charge of that scene, you only have a limited number of resources and you have a large list of problems. So we actually have a system where we very quickly list the problems. What's the number one priority here? What's the number two priority? So the way it kind of gets organized is problem, solution, tactic. So what would be a problem? A problem would be people sick on the front lawn with smoke inhalation. A problem would be fire in the building. A problem would be fire spreading to other buildings. A problem would be person lost in the building. Those are the problems. What are the solutions? What are the strategies? Well, the strategy would be give medical aid to the people who are sick, extinguish the fire that's in the building, control the exposure so it doesn't spread to other buildings, and then search for the missing person. What are the tactics? The tactics would be specifically who's doing what. Jim and Susan, you guys go give medical aid. Engine 2, you guys are going to put out the fire. Engine 3, you guys are going to set up exposure control. Engine 4, you guys are going to do a search for the missing person. And then there's some other things that have to happen as well. I'm simplifying this. But then the most important part that people miss, right now all we have is a mess of problems and solutions, is we prioritize it. What has to happen first? Right? We have a problems, solutions, tactics, and then we organize what has to happen first. And we only have a limited number of resources. So do we think, based on what we see, that there's a savable life in there? Because that would change it, right? If there's black smoke coming out of every window, well, the odds of that person being alive are pretty low. If it's just smoke in one part of the building, okay, now the odds go up. So we're going to shuffle the priority of what we deal with first. And if you start thinking about what are my problems and which is the most urgent, and then which do I take action on first, that's a very valuable approach. And it doesn't take that long. There's a way to do it in 15 seconds when you're at a fire. Is it going to be perfect? No. You might change it. Yeah, of course. All plans are subject to change. As you already said, no plan of action survives contact with the enemy. That's true. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't have a plan. And if you start without a plan, that's the easiest way to have a complete disaster. So you have a plan and you know it's going to change.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
Because that's the beauty throughout the book, is there's all these gems of thinking and ways to deal with it. And I think where I had to write it down where he said, but I loved how there can be the flip side of life became simple. Get up, fight to overcome the day's adversaries, and sleep. And I thought, if that's not just a perfect analogy for life in today's society, and it's that moment of like, you can do this, you can have the self-reflection, you can learn how, I need to drill some holes to stop the water getting in the casing to get and destroy my maps. My drone wasn't calibrated correctly, so it flew into some trees. And of course, I would have been like thinking about that the whole trip, raging about it. You just went, that's no flights. I'll just have to send it home. You kind of just dealt with it, but you also explained your thinking and how you kept yourself pushing on, which I think helps so many people reading it. But do you think that ability of, okay, my hand was swollen, my shoulder's killing me, but I'm just going to focus solely on the paddling, looking at my technique, do you think that is the flip side? Is zoning in on one task at a time, zoning on the actual motion, so you just become centered, forget the noise, and you can focus solely on what you need to do to win or achieve your goal that day?
I think that's a very valuable skill, being able to just zone in on one thing. And certainly anyone who works in any kind of creative field, we know how difficult it is to, try to write 1,000 words, try to edit a video, I don't paint, but I would imagine doing a painting is difficult when you've got distractions, right? The doorbell rings, your WhatsApp pings, your dog needs to go out. Oh, you got an Instagram notification, somebody liked your post. somebody's dropping off a package, that is the absolute worst way to get anything done, because you're trying to create that ability to focus on just one thing, even for a little while. And so, when writing stuff like this, there were actually times that I took my computer and went out into my car and closed the door and turned off that way I'm away from my Wi-Fi. I had my phone off and I'm kind of hiding out in the car. And still sometimes my kids came and found me and ruined my ability or my attempt to isolate myself to create that focus. At the same time, hyperfocus can be dangerous when you're trying to remain aware of different things, right? You don't want to be so focused in on, your paddling that you're ignoring changes in the wind or that you're ignoring navigation. So there's an immersion in an activity, which is amazing. And I earlier I said, I don't recommend what I did to the general population if you don't have the skills or you don't want to go out and acquire the skills. And that's still true. But I think there's a real value to the outdoors and that could be as simple as going for a walk in the English hills to doing the Camino de Santiago in Portugal and Spain to going and taking a guided sea kayak trip or whatever. Because I think being in the outdoors helps create that immersion in something. And it allows you to sort of run a subroutines, right? I knew that I would do I hesitate to use the word healing because I think it's so prone to woo-woo interpretations, but healing and resolving kind of runs in the background by creating being able to focus on something. Like the experience of being in the outdoors is immersive, and it takes your mind off of the day-to-day, and your phone isn't going off and things aren't bugging you all the time. It's one experience. And I think that allows deeper subroutines to run in your mind and to process stuff that you need to process. So I'm a very strong advocate of the outdoors being a place where you can focus and where you can grow. And it doesn't need to be something crazy. For me, maybe it does more, but that's only because my baseline has gotten irrevocably shifted to something insane because of the stuff I used to do when I was young.
I mean, I love the little kind of understandings in the book. As you follow along the journey, we can see you get these aha moments, because you said movement generally beats meditation, and the ability to quickly take decisive action is probably the single most significant determinant of success in life. And I found that sentence just keeps popping up sometimes when I'm thinking about a problem and I go, oh, wait, no, I'm just living the problem. I'm not actually going off and dealing with it at this point. So I'll try to just take action and then reflect on it, how I can fix it, how I can improve it. And I find these sorts of things really help us. That nowadays we talk about problems, we discuss them. We very rarely get told, okay, go try that, see how that works, come back and let us know. How much of your sort of training, because you trained your physiology and your psychology, how much of this did you train yourself cognitively versus how much you trained yourself physically? How on earth do you prepare for something like this and build your mind as much as your body?
I think it's the same as any kind of training. You do it in little chunks and pieces. You put yourself into a situation where you're challenged, but the results of screwing up aren't going to be catastrophic. If we were trying to learn MMA fighting, and you're taking I'm a raw beginner. I've never fought before, so I look up who is the best MMA fighter active today. And I don't know when people are going to be listening to this, so I'll just say Jim Bob. Jim Bob is a monster. So clearly what I need to do to get good at MMA is to schedule a fight with Jim Bob where he's going to try and murder me and I'm going to try and murder him. And that's the best way to learn MMA, isn't it? So I'm going against the best in the world. Clearly not. Clearly that'd be insane, because the cost of failure would be so high. I would come out of there with a concussion, brain damage, a broken nose, broken teeth, maybe dislocated joints, and an inability to train and get better. And probably I would give up training altogether, and my skill in MMA would have gone up not at all.
Yeah.
So the ability to overcome, it's the little successes that build the big successes. So if in this case of this trip, the thing that allowed me to run really quite difficult whitewater was over the years running easy whitewater and going to relatively easy rivers with friends, wearing a wetsuit or a dry suit in a boat that's fully kitted out with airbags. So if it flips, it's probably not going to get damaged. If it flips, maybe I can roll back up, and doing difficult moves on easy rapids. And that develops the decision-making process over time. Similarly, it's the drilling and it's the positional sparring in jiu-jitsu. Hey, you just sit on me and mount, and I'm going to try and get out. And if you can go for the head and arm choke, please do so. And so we're playing just a small aspect of the game. And if I get out, it's not the end of the world for you. It's not the end of the world for me. We both got a little bit more experience, and now we're building. So does that answer your question in terms of how to build this? You're talking about building the mental state to overcome
because
setbacks.
you use the mantra, the more you sweat in peace, the more you can avoid bleeding in war. The less you bleed in war. And I love that approach of, like, as much as you can prepare, but then while you're doing it, you then talk about breaking down your enormous task into general manageable tasks. So, you can prepare as much as possible. And then you can kind of go, okay, I need to go from here to that past that rapid. That's all I'm thinking about to do that. I'm going to count the strokes because my shoulder's killing me. I'm going to do this, and this, or I'm going to set up this line here and just get my food. It's like you're literally focused on the next task at hand. Because when you look at what you did, it's insane. It's weeks of travel by yourself through bear country. When you see the distance alone that you went, you go, How much did you use your jiu-jitsu training to fall back on?
Quite a bit. I think there are two things that are true. Number one is that pain is subjective, but number two, toughness is transferable. And so by pain being subjective, I mean, when people who've never done jiu-jitsu before, they start jiu-jitsu, they're like, oh my God, my face is getting crushed. I can't breathe. I'm getting claustrophobic. And it's a very specific kind of pain. And it's, when you might have somebody who's really good at jiu-jitsu, but then they go and try and do a marathon, but they're not conditioned to the pain of running a marathon because it's a different kind of discomfort. So the type of pain and being good at dealing with one kind of pain doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good at dealing with another kind of pain. That being said, toughness that you develop in one area is transferable. So anything you do that's difficult, whether that's running or weightlifting or studying really hard to get your master's degree, or jiu-jitsu, focusing on that when you're a smaller, older grappler in a class full of big killers, you're learning things, but you're also learning how to be tougher and how to learn with adversity and defeat. Because by definition, you're going to get smashed. Things are not going to go your way. And you kind of get used to this idea of, like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to roll with Ian today, and I'm going to use an over-under guard pass on him. And then when he thinks that I'm going to go for the guard pass, I'm going to go for the dog bar. That's my plan. And we go, and I try and go for the over-under pass, and you sweep me and roll me to the top, and then you crush me with Kazagatame or something. I had a plan. I tried to make it work. It didn't work. This is normal. If we can internalize that, and we can internalize, okay, my plan didn't go according to plan, and I have to keep going anyway, then I think that carries across. So anything that you do that's difficult, and I don't only mean physically difficult, but the physically difficult things are obviously the easiest ones to focus on, help you doing other things that are difficult. There's a lot of transferability in that sort of that realization that that there are continuous problem solving requirements, and that things are not always going to go according to plan.
Because that's, I mean, like I was saying earlier, it's like there's so many gems throughout the book, and like you had the mantras of tap early, be a hero later, survive first, then win later. And I loved that because I was thinking these are jiu-jitsu terms that mean, because I'm used to the training sort of thing, but you think, oh, I could use that in life. How many times there's one where you said, no more mistakes after you'd had a couple of errors. And I loved that kind of, you were just telling yourself, right, that's it, we're going to focus solely on this. But then when you do come to something and you go, oh no, wait, and that's dangerous, I'm going to back up here. You talk about how you operate at a level below what you know you're capable of. It's a way of keeping safe. How much of these kind of mantras, what was the thing, the mindset hacks that you found that really made a benefit out of all these kind of little things that you were learning? What ones stick out as the key things that helped you during this trip?
I think you've mentioned a bunch of them. This idea of survive first, win later really talks to avoiding the catastrophic things that'll take you out of the game permanently. And, no matter how hard you push, you're not going to get a 50-day, 1,000-mile journey done in a single day. It's not going to happen. So by definition, it's a multi-day challenge. No matter how hard you study, you're not going to get your PhD in a week. That's a multi-year process. So then how do you push as hard as you can, but avoid the catastrophic things? I mean, if we take a look at sports with very different risk profiles, 100-yard dash versus free climbing some cliff face. If I'm racing the 100-yard dash, my level of exertion should be close to 10 out of 10. I don't want to be so high that my form goes to hell, but basically, by the time I cross that finish line, I shouldn't be going, I wonder if I could have pushed another 20% harder. You should be there within the top couple of percent of how hard you can possibly go. And what are the worst case scenarios? Well, you might tear a muscle. You might fall down and get embarrassed. I guess you could maybe have a collision with somebody and break a leg. Surgery's pretty good. I mean, clearly nobody wants to get injured. Whereas if you're free climbing on cliffs and there's 100 feet or 1,000 feet of air beneath you, you need a very different approach to risk. Because here, one little slip that would, if you're racing a 100-yard dash and you do one little slip, you're going to maybe lose the race, right? You're going to come in, you're going to take 0.01 seconds off your time, and guess what? Somebody else is going to pass you by 0.01 seconds. If you do a little slip on a cliff face, you fall to your death. So I encourage risk. Like, I think taking risk is an important thing, but I encourage taking intelligent risk. And I also encourage taking risk that just falls on your own shoulders, right? If you really want to go free climbing and people look at that and go, you are out of your mind. So long as you know what the consequences are, so long as you've done the training, go for it. If that's really what gives your life meaning, go for it. The calculus changes a little bit if, say, you're free climbing and there's a whole bunch of people underneath you. There's a wedding party at the bottom of the cliff. It's a pretty complicated analogy here. And if you fall, you're going to land on 1, 2, or 3 people and kill them too. Now your calculus changes. If, as a parent, your calculus has to change, because you dying, obviously, if I drown out there in the wilderness, my kids don't drown, but I am they are a second order effect, or they suffer from the second order effects of that, which is now they grow up without a father. So staying a level below what you can do, which is another thing that you brought up, in the wilderness, you have to leave something in the tank. You can't be going at 100% to 100% of your physical limit, because what if something goes wrong? You're pushing at 100% of your physical limit because you really want to get to here by a certain time. And you get there, and then you find out that is not the end, because what you thought was there isn't there. For some reason, you have to keep going. You pull up to the perfect campsite, and there's a family of bears on it. Okay, I got to keep going. I cannot stay here. So if you've gone to 100% of if you used up all the fuel in your tank, by that point, you're screwed. Whereas in a jiu-jitsu match, if you're losing and there are only 10, 15 seconds left, you should try everything you can to get out of that bad position, to try and win the match. You should leave it all on the match. You should leave it all on the mat. Obviously, hopefully not injuring yourself, but you shouldn't be able to walk off that mat if you're losing. You should just be cooked. So what are the differences there? Well, on the jiu-jitsu front, if you are completely cooked, you might not be able to compete in your next match. Okay, well, that would be sad, but it's not, the consequences that aren't very high. If you're, I don't know, climbing some mountain and you are completely cooked and you didn't make it back to your camp, now you're really in trouble, because nighttime's coming and it's getting colder and you're out of water and you're out of fuel and you're out of food, and good luck. So the idea of leaving a little bit in the tank was also important. And here, I'll give you the most unlikely advice that you're never going to hear from a life coach or a guru. A lot of it is lying to yourself. How do you lie to yourself? I'm just going to go for a little bit here. I'm just going to get started. I'm just going to go for a couple of hours today. And then once in motion, you keep going. And now, instead of just going for a couple of hours, you've gone for 10 hours, 12 hours. The weather is going to get better today. I know it's going to get better. If you've ever worked with kids, you're taking kids on a camping trip, you know that a lot of it is lying to them. Right? Oh, I know it's rainy, but don't worry, it's going to get nice this afternoon. We're going to have so much fun anyway. And then you end up having fun, even though the weather never does get better. So you can lie to kids. You can also lie to yourself. And so strategic lying to yourself and strategically distracting yourself are important tools to use in moderation. But it's not always going to be like this. I'm just going to go for a little bit. I'm only going to write one page of this document. I'm just going to get this task started, and that helps get you over that initial hump that is usually between you and anything worth achieving. That initial hump is a hard one to cross.
Because I think that's a big thing about the book, is like there's a gem on every couple of pages, where you kind of go, oh, that's a really good way of looking at it. I'm going to try and incorporate that. And it's like what you're saying is, I think you said about the times you tried to go to training, you couldn't be bothered, but you put your gi on and thought, I'm just going to turn up at the car park. And half the time it's, well, I'm there anyway, I may as well just go in. Yeah. It's like going to the gym and do one set of one exercise. Well, and you think, if you're still not happy, then leave. But at least you've done one thing, and then suddenly you go, well, I'll just do a second one while here. And before you know it, you've done a full workout. But I did love that in the book where you were like, okay, I'm just going to do a wee bit more here. And you do an extra 15 kilometers paddling while you're in agony, and then, or you would talk about your recovery where you bought some cherries and you inhaled some ice cream sandwiches outside a shop. These little things, these kind of like, we follow you through this journey and we're knackered as we follow you. Never mind what you were going to go through. How did you use recovery, the well-being, the satellite phone calls to your wife and kids? How did you deal, how did you use that? And what did it teach you about coming back stronger? To to persevere, but also to then use it as a chance to grow and rehab and learn about yourself, but come back stronger emotionally, spiritually, physically, in whatever sense we're using it.
Yeah. I think it certainly happened. The at the end of the journey and in the months that followed, I think it really did help answer some questions for me and bring me closer to acceptance on some issues. Whether that was done intentionally or not is a good question. I think creating the space for that stuff to happen is important. And that's, again, why I think the outdoors is good, because by being in a place where you're connecting with nature, which I think for most people, not necessarily everybody, but for most people, we have wiring that activates when we're in nature. I mean, we lived in basically a natural setting. You know, human beings, anatomically modern humans, are a couple 100,000 years old that entire time. And all of our ancestors prior to that, everything from the early Homo sapiens to Australopithecines and before that, they were living in nature. Surely some of that has to be wired into our brain. So being in a place like that really creates the opportunity, and getting away from the distractions really creates the opportunity to do that and to do some growing. In the short term, the day-to-day recovery, that was something I could have handled a lot better. And it's something I actually think I've improved on since I wrote that book. I figured, because the basis of short-term recovery, if we're not talking sort of existential recovery, if we're just talking recovery from feeling like dog shit because you've been going for 12 days straight without a day off, the core of that recovery is sleep, and the core of that recovery is rest and nutrition, but mostly sleep, and then it'd be nutrition. And on subsequent trips that I've done, which haven't been as long, but some of them have been pretty remote, I think I've made sort of tactical improvements in how to get better sleep when you're out in the bush and how to improve on nutrition when you're out in the bush. And I think that would have helped. If there's one thing I could have changed about that trip, that long trip that I did, it would have been better sleep. My sleep was so fragmented. And we all know that, you know, if you don't sleep enough, you don't recover. And it also affects mindset, right? You go from, oh, this is an interesting challenge to, oh, this is the worst thing ever. And it's still the same thing. You're still dealing with the same issue. But in one, you're like, if you've had a good night's sleep, you're like, oh, there's 3 different ways I could solve this problem. And if you had, you know, a shit night's sleep, you're like, I can't believe this is happening. This is the worst. So that if we're talking recovery in the short term, that is something that I struggled with quite a bit and kind of made a mental note to improve on in the future, and I have.
Because it definitely comes across in the book, like about how you can be as prepared as you want, but the second you get soaked, it goes up. You get the chill across your face, or your lips get chapped, or all these like mishaps. We're all fine when we're tough, when we're strong, when we're fed, when we're warm, we've got a full belly, whatever. Second, you can't sleep, or you're soaked through, you're chilled, or you're worried about a bear coming, so you hardly sleep, or you sleep in the wrong position, so your neck's sore. Or there's so much in the book, and then you go into these great things of, here's a way I managed it myself. Here's an insight for us to then apply to our own lives, and we get so much from it. This question might get you in trouble, though. You referred to your wife as a strange woman when she agreed to let you go off the day after you married her on this escapade. You talk in the book about these amazing, like the Inuit tribes, the people of Cree, all these kind of fascinating parts of your journey and the interactions as you go along. what has this taught you about people, our connections, us as humans? I know it's quite a sort of grandiose question, but what's it taught you about our place in the world? Because you realize nature could wipe us off the planet if it wanted. We're nothing when you see the speck of the power of wildlife and nature, etc. What have you learned about your relationship? What have you learned about being a father, about being the coach, the guide through your guiding us through the book? What's it taught you? How have you changed since then?
Yeah. So the irony of doing a solo trip in the wilderness is that it's not really a solo trip in the wilderness. It's to some extent a team effort. It's a team effort with your family. Your family has to support you to some extent. And I'm very lucky that my wife did support me. And, when we, it turned out she wanted to get married in a certain place, in the UBC, University of British Columbia Botanical Gardens. It's a beautiful setting, but we lost the date that we were supposed to get married in the fall. The only other time they had available was the day before I was supposed to leave on this journey.
I'm sure that went down well.
It went down really quite well. I said, would you like me to change the date? And she said, no, stick with the plan. Now, a cynic might argue that maybe I haven't yet found out about the massive amount of life insurance that she took out on me. And I don't think that's the case. But it does speak to the importance of finding people who are willing to support you. And if I'm willing to support somebody in some way, their support to me doesn't have to be the exact same way. If somebody, I don't know, likes tango dancing and I can support their tango activities by not freaking out when they go to dance tango with some other guy at tango class, and they can support me. I guess the obvious example here would be when I want to go off every couple of years on a solo trip for a couple of weeks to, a couple of months. So it doesn't need to be reciprocal. It doesn't need to be fairsy squaresy. It just needs to meet both people's needs. So the larger point, though, is really, as I was saying, it was a solo trip, but I did it within the context of a social web. So there's obviously my family. There's obviously my brother. I wouldn't have been doing that trip if my brother hadn't given me that kidney. So my brother was out there with me. Then in a kind of a larger sense, had I run into problems, I could have pretty much gone to any of the Cree, Dene, or Inuit villages along the way, knocked on the door, said, hey, there weren't that many villages. There were, for the first half of the trip, I passed 3 little villages, and then in the second half of the trip, nobody. But had I come across a hunter and said, I've lost my boat, they would have helped me. And if I had come across a hunter who said, I lost my boat and I broke my leg, I would have helped him. And there's kind of a camaraderie out there. So just because I didn't run into people doesn't mean that they wouldn't have helped each other, and that I wasn't to some extent relying on that. I was relying, even though I didn't call them, on bush plane pilots, right? If I broke my leg, if I lost all my equipment, if my tent burned down, if all my food got stolen by a bear, what's my backup plan? What's to get on my GPS satellite communicator, to get on my sat phone, and then there was one more way I could send messages by routing my phone through a satellite dish. I could have called for a bush plane to come get me. That's me relying on other people. So just because you're doing something alone doesn't mean that you are achieving it alone. The fact I was up there, to some extent, not as concretely, meant that I was following in the footsteps of many thousands of native people over many thousands of years who had traveled this route. It's the route called the Old Way North. It basically connects the boreal forest with the tundra. It was an ancient trade route. The fact that it's known, the fact that some of these portages have been there for thousands of years, even though they're not much traveled today, connects you to the people who were there, the people who suffered from the same mosquitoes. So just because you're there by yourself doesn't mean it's not connecting you to the greater web of humanity.
Because that's definitely what I took from it, was how you were connected to your history, to your family, to the future generations you were inspiring, to the training, the people you had competed or trained. Or there's so much involvement, and even just each person that you met, you were part of their story as much as you were, like, vice versa. And
You won't believe what happened. I ran into this crazy guy today.
But there generally is a joy in each page of, like, you commiserate with we applaud you during your things. We see we feel the anxiety, the danger, like, it's such a good read. And I knew there were so many times I wanted to say, stop here, let's go into this a bit more, because you were talking about, like, sports psychology, and I'd be like, oh, this is brilliant. And they're like, no, we need to get back to the story. And it is a genuine joy to read. But how would you want people to read this? To not just take it as understand your story, but like we said earlier about the Matrix film, to see it on the different levels, to understand, to grow. How do you want people to take this book and then go out and live their life?
Well, far be it from me to tell people how to solve their own individual problems, but it's a certainty that everybody's going to have problems. At some point, you're going to deal with major health issues. Hopefully, you're in your 80s when that happens, but you never know. Hopefully, if you live long enough, you will have friends and, unfortunately, family members pass away. How are you going to deal with that? You're going to have to at some point. I think that seeing how somebody else struggled through, sometimes not very gracefully, their own process, and that process might look insane to other people, but it made sense to me, might encourage them to find their own route through, even if it looks insane to other people, and to try one thing, and if it doesn't work, try another thing. Obviously, I'm a big advocate for trying it in the outdoors, but if that doesn't work, then go try it in whatever your setting is, whether that's, make some time and some space to deal with the things that are eating at you. It's just an example. I don't think my way has to be your way, but it's sometimes useful to see that somebody found a way, and it's pretty strange. And some people would think it's kind of mental, but it makes sense within my context. So what's going to make sense in your context? I don't know. Something different, probably.
I know that wherever you are in life, somebody will get something from this book. It could be a new way of thinking. It could be a inspiration, a motivation. It could even be kind of dragging them out of a dark place where they think they don't know how to continue. But just like you're saying, by seeing how you went through it and what you learned from it could be enough to change someone's life. It is a phenomenal piece of writing. And it's not just for people who want to read about insects with larvae and how you went past islands and inhaling ice cream sandwiches. There's so much more to this behind it, and I generally think everybody should get a copy of it, because everybody needs to go on the journey of their version of this trip and learn how to push on in life, because we're all capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit. I know we're short on time, but I would love to have you back on, because I think we're just touching the surface and so much in this book. But what would you want people to take from this? Like, what would you want this as the message to take from this interview?
Wow. It's a difficult thing because everybody's different. But at the same time, human beings have been struggling through loss and through difficult situations ever since we were human, right? Right? Every one of your ancestors figured out how to struggle through life long enough, at least to reproduce. And you said it. I think that we are a lot tougher than we give ourselves credit for. Sometimes it takes a while to get there. And just because you muddle around trying all the wrong things first, or muddle around and are unable to take action for a while, don't give up, because eventually hopefully, if you keep looking and if you keep trying different things, it's kind of that act of looking that's often helpful. It's the fact, I can't go this way. Maybe I'll go this way. Oh, damn it, that way's blocked too. What if I go way out here? We're talking metaphorically here, right? I hate my job. I just can't stand my job. Well, maybe I should try this kind of job. Maybe I should try to experience this other thing. Maybe I should just test out the waters a little bit here. Maybe by trying out these different things, I will eventually find a route through. I'll eventually find my answer. My answer isn't everybody's answer, but when I think of how my life has been changed by little chance encounters, by people whose names I might not even remember, who just casually dropped something, and it just stuck in my brain. And for better or for worse, it made an impression. And years later, that has become part of my psyche. It's become part of my belief system. It's kind of amazing how we are these adaptive sponges that absorb ideas. And if people come away with one idea from this book, that's great. That's fantastic. I'd be so thrilled. And if they want to tell me about it, I'd love to hear it. That'd be the ultimate honor. That'd be the ultimate endorsement. It would make me very happy.
Well, I know you're going to get more than that, because there's so much to take from it. And it doesn't matter whatever part of journey you're on in life, you will get something from this. There's so much to absorb, understand. And I mean, I can't even remember when I first discovered you. And then it must have been something you said on an Instagram or a YouTube video that suddenly I thought, oh, wait. And then I went in and watched some more of your videos. And before I know it, like we were saying at the start, it's been years that we've interacted through different things. And I was kind of like, whoa, he just gets it. Every time I see something, you're thinking, it opens me up to thinking in new ways or taking new points and stuff. And I think you very well deserve success with this book. It's gonna help so many people. But until we can do another one and really go into other areas, how do you want people to follow this journey? I mean, you've got the grapple art side of things. You've got your own stuff. How do we follow along and see the amazing author picture, for example, you took? How do we interact with the book? How do we get in touch with you to let you know about our own perseverance journey? Yeah. How do we compliment you on your berry? All these things.
Well, my presence online is kind of multiple personality disorder, right? There's the jiu-jitsu martial arts aspect, and that's all through grapple arts. And if you search my name, Stephan_Kesting on Instagram, Stephan Kesting on YouTube, grapplearts.com. That's the martial arts aspect of it. I've started putting my outdoor musings and ramblings and videos on another channel, Essential Wilderness. So that's at Essential Wilderness on Instagram. It's at Essential Wilderness on YouTube. It's Essential Wilderness, the site. And I'm trying to grow that out. I think you have to have them separately, even though there is so much overlap there. And I think the book kind of represents the overlap. If people want to grab the book, that's available anywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo. I don't know the Scottish bookstores so well, but I went and checked at I went online and checked the local independent bookstore that's just around the corner and typed it in. And yeah, it was there available for orders. So it's pretty much everywhere. It's also on Kindle. It's also on audio, in audiobook. format, so you can get it pretty much anywhere. I think those are the main ways to get a hold of me and to consume my content for what it's worth.
Well, that's it for another week, and thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.